Hoi no kia ora tātou. Tēnei te mihi ake o tira kia tāne whakapiripiri. Rāua ko hine whakaruru hau. E Manaaki Tiaki hata whaipai nei a tata. Anō reira tēnei te mihi ake kia kōrua. O tira kia whakaharihia tētahi whakarite pōramo mo tātou hei whakatau ai wā tātou wairua, tainua ki te tō tātou kaupapa. Nō reira, kia ora tātou. Tei reureu te tei pūpūtanga tōku, tei reureu tanga e. Tōku tei rua whākene mai ana rā ki te tūreirei pō, ki te tūreirei o. Hākene ana rā tōku whatuna kau ki te orio tōku whanua. Harara e tā e hūkere mai e, hūkere mai e, hui e haumi e, Taiki e. Ko te kore, ko te pū, ko te more, ko te weu, ko te aka, ko te rea, ko te waunui. Ko te kune, ko te whē, ko iwa nake. Ko whetua, ko te rā, ko te marama, ko te pō, ko te ao. A ko rangi nui e tui honei, ko papa tua nuku e takoto nei. Ko ngā pautiri o te ao, ko ngā pautiri o te pō, uhia werohia. Tā maua te hiringa, tā maua te horonga, tūturu o whiti whakamaua ka tīna, hui e, taiki e. Ukuku ana taku tei pāpā ki te haukene tanga o tōku areare. I uru mai ai i ngā rangi ki runga, i ngā rangi ki raro. I hākene mai ai te takapū ehu. Mai runga ia papatūā nuku, ia papatūā neke. I haere tūārangi mai ai rote ārangi ki te kāpeipētanga o te ārua. I hau ai rāua i a tātou katoa, i hau ai tātou i roto i a rāua, hui e haumi e, taiki e. Au tira e i o mātua kore hine nui te pāre more motanga e tāne nui te ururu parapara e te katoa. A e rangi e papa, mea kōrua tamariki tini, e o mātou tipune o mātou mātua. Au tira koutou nā kaitaki o te tai au e wānanga hia nei ai e mata. Koutou nā kaitaki whakanō hia ai o mātou tipune o mātou mātua. A ki runga ki roto i ngā itanga katoa, i nōhia i ngā tamariki ārangi rao ko papa. Ko ia tēnei mātou, a mea o mātou tūmanako, a i ngā huarahi a o tira, he whakarohia nei ai e mātou ki te Manaaki, ki te Tiaki a ta whaipai a koto. Au i whō mai ai e koto, a ko a koto Manaaki Tiaki a ta whaipai ārahi, ki runga ki a mātou. A mākoto hei hiki, o tira i te ārai o te māramatanga, e ki te ake ai e mata, nā mea kāre mātou i te kite, e rongo ai mātou i ngā mea kāre mātou i te rongo. E tae ai mātou i te whakakotahi ai a mātou ki te tūna tahi, a me te whakaroka tahi, a i runga i te kaupapa, a Manaaki, Tiaki a ta whaipai a koto. O tira i te irunga i roto i te kaupapa o te kai Tiakitanga. A nā koutou i tuku iho ki a mātou, a koutou tamariki e tū whakaiti koropiko nei ki mua ki a koutou aro katoa ai tēnei ata. A kia tau ko te atua o te rangi marie, ko te atua o te hūmarie. A ko te atua o te aroha nui, me te atua o te whakamarie tango ngā mea katoa. Ki runga ki tēnei whare, ki runga ki tēnei kaupapa, ki runga ki tēnei whakamininga, koropiko whakaiti nei ki mua ki a koutou aro. E tēnei rā hari honei mutunga kore, hui e haumi e, taiki e. Kia ora tātou.
Mōra koutou, e tū koutou katoa. Stand up everybody and we'll do our waiata from yesterday. Kia reti koe, ki te tōtara. E tū, tāne mahuta. Mauri ora, te wairo o te tōtara. E tū, tāne mahuta. Ora hia ngā here, puri ane, e te hau. Makere ana, e tū, tāne mahuta. E tū, tāne mahuta. Hei-ha!
E ngā reo, e ngā mana, e ngā waka, e ngā tini kārangaranga, e ngā rauranga tirama. Tuatahi māko ka miha tuki a koe kara e James, ko koe tēnei I tuku atu ngā kupu whakawhetā ka moimiki ki tō te wāhi ngaro. Nā reira tēnā rā koe whakatutuki ana tēnā wehenga mō tātou. Hei hakatima tātou tō tātou hui ngā tuaru te rāne. Nā reira ngā mihi. Kia koutou ngā rauringa tira mako tau mai tēnei rā tuarua mo tēnei hui ngā nau mai haere mai. Haere mai rao ki me ngā itua maha I rungi a koutou I hinga atu nei, hinga atu nā roto e tātou tini marae o te motu, e tirara mai nei ko. Taki tini hoki rātu kua whiturangi tia, ko tai atu ki te okiokinga, engari ko tahi tono na kōroro mō rātou, haere rā ngā mate haere. Haere rā ki te pūtahi tango rehua ki te huihuanga rangatira. Haere rā hoki atu ki te iwi, hoki atu ki te kāinga, ki te wāhi tūturu mō tātou. Nā reira ngā mate haere, oti atu. Nā reira kau ke kūmea ke nui ni mihi kia rohona tuana whakatau mai nea koutou rārunga na ngā huatanga tātou rā te iwi Māori hoki, huri noa, kia ora tātou.
Mauri ora kia tātou. Mauri ora kia tātou, tēnā koutou, te pāwhakawairua I a tātou, tēnā rā koutou katoa e aku rangatira. O tira tātou katoa, mōrena, kei te pēhea koutou, kei te pai, kei te āhua pai. Well, crazy and ambitious is what it's called, everybody. And yesterday was quite crazy and ambitious, but in terms of time today, it won't be as ambitious. Nō reira, me whakanui tātou e te wā e toi ana kia tātou, so we have until about 4:30 today to spend time together, to put our ideas out there, to build this beautiful future and to bring everyone on the waka with us. So a couple of pānui, a couple of notes. Mike King loved his tree. I checked in with him and said, you know, people reference him all the way through today. Karepa he tuatu I tēnā, and that's probably the best kind of mihi when people are quoting you all through the day. We also probably should have told you this a little bit earlier. The coffee doesn't even need a voucher now. You can just go on up. Because basically we have decided the coffee cart of hope, thanks to ko tātou, should be for everyone. Nō reira, hau mai te paki. You do deserve it. And as I said, Māori ora. Yesterday we said kia ora to each other. Today, let's upgrade it to Māori ora. Of course, Māori is life force, the life force that we recognise in every living thing. So could we turn to someone who's different from the person that we turned to yesterday and say, Māori ora? I recognise your beautiful life force and the life force of all things. Tēnā rā koutou te hunga katahia no katai mai. So the ones who just arrived today, welcome to this big old day. We are talkers, as you can tell. In terms of housekeeping, the things you need to know are that there are wharepaku just out there. That's the most urgent thing, out to the left. In terms of if there is emergency. You weren't here yesterday, but Mike King said basically if you can't find your way to a fire exit, then you probably, it's just natural attrition. But we trust you. You will be fine. And everything is videoed today, and it will be available on the BioHeritage site. So let's get straight into it. E tika ana kia mihi ki te wahine marekura ka tahi anō ka tai mai, and we are very fortunate to be joined now by the Honourable Dr. Megan Woods, Minister of Research, Science and Innovation. But I did want to mention as well that before she was an MP, Megan worked as a business manager at Plant and Food Research. Quite relevant, all of her experience. Nō reira, tātou katoa tēnā kua homai te pakipaki, Minister of Research, Science and Innovation, the Honourable Dr. Megan Woods. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you. Well, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. And thank you very much for this invitation to be with you here at this conference. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the New Zealand's Biological Heritage National Science Challenge and all its parties that we see listed up here, members of its governance group, and the challenge host Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research. I also acknowledge members of iwi and local communities here today, the impressive array of keynote speakers that you've had throughout this 2 days, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, Simon Upton, the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor, Juliet Gerard, and other distinguished guests. It's my pleasure here today to address you as the Minister of Research, Science and Innovation. However, like most of you, I'm not here only in my professional capacity, but also because I personally value our wonderful natural environment we have in New Zealand, and that is our biological heritage. And I'd like to thank you for the work that you're all doing to protect that. It's a very timely conversation for you to be having here, and I acknowledge that this is work that sometimes happens on the front line. Too much on the front line in terms of some of you and how contentious your work is with some members of the community, so I acknowledge that and thank you for the work that you are doing there. Because our biological heritage is our identity. So to hear that I can be part of Crazy and Ambitious, the sequel, as I like to call it, I'm very proud to be able to be part of this conversation. We are all Kiwis, and we all share a love of and are rightly proud of the wild and beautiful landscapes and the unique flora and fauna that define our whenua, our country. Our biological heritage not only has significant intrinsic cultural and social value, it is also a key part of our economic infrastructure. In the past year, for example, we were enjoyed by 3.8 million international visitors and tourists, generating over $11 billion in revenue. And we recognise that we cannot separate a prosperous economy from a healthy environment. And we reject the notion as a government that balancing the economy and the environment means the environment must come off second best. In pursuing economic benefits, we must also protect our biological heritage. Most of our native flora and fauna are unique. They are only found here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, so no one else is going to protect them. That is up to us. Our biological heritage faces unprecedented threats from global warming, from our own impacts on the environment, and from introduced animals that have eliminated or currently threaten many of New Zealand's Indigenous species. The New Zealand's Biological Heritage National Science Challenge is charged with protecting and managing New Zealand's native biodiversity, improving our biosecurity, and enhancing our resilience to harmful organisms. So this, your second conference, and the Crazy and Ambitious title is apt. These are the words of the late Sir Paul Callaghan as he considered the idea that by 2050, New Zealand might be free of at least some of the small predators currently responsible for our declining biodiversity. The objective of the challenge is certainly ambitious, and perhaps the science that will provide solution to reverse biodiversity decline may seem a little crazy at first, but this government is convinced that protection of our biological heritage is, in the words of Sir Paul, definitely worth a shot. That is why we're pleased to announce last year investment of over $37 million for the second phase of research in the New Zealand's Biological Heritage Challenge, and to provide surge investment of a further $13.75 million to tackle Kauri dieback and myrtle rust. New Zealand's Biological Heritage is one of the 11 national science challenges that are tackling a range of large and complex issues facing New Zealand, from improving our health and well-being, to mitigating adverse environmental impacts of human existence, to predicting our future climate under climate change. Last year, all the challenges were reviewed by panels of national and international experts. The reviews showed that the challenges are fundamentally changing the way we are doing science in New Zealand. Challenges bring together our top scientists and researchers to work collaboratively across disciplines with Māori and other stakeholders. They are developing science that is both excellent and relevant. This is a world-leading approach that is delivering enduring benefits for New Zealand. And I'm sure everybody in this room knows that New Zealand has world-class scientists producing world-leading research. We have the will and the capability to protect our biological heritage, to enhance the legacy we leave for future generations, and at the same time be part of a global solution to maintain and enhance environmental quality. We must and we can lead by example. New Zealand's biological heritage research and its focus on 3 impact areas, whakamana, Tiaki and whakahau, align well with that vision. The challenges of working to address big environmental challenges, such as becoming predator-free by 2050, restoring freshwater quality, connecting people to nature in cities, future-proofing New Zealand's biosecurity system, and building those resilient ecosystems. The challenge has proved its ability to bring together teams with the right mix of passionate scientists, Māori and a wide range of stakeholders, to provide those innovative approaches to protecting our biodiversity. Challenge researchers are also joining up environmental research across New Zealand and making strategic links with collaborators globally. New Zealand's biological heritage tackles biodiversity and biosecurity as interdependent rather than separate disciplines, and is working across both conservation and production landscapes. Our managed landscapes also contain unique species and ecosystems, and we need to ensure these too are not lost. There is a substantial body of Mātauranga Māori associated with our land and its flora and fauna, including traditional ways of managing our natural environment. And it's particularly pleasing to see the close relation with Māori that New Zealand's biological heritage has developed to date. These recognise the role of tangata whenua as kaitiaki and the deep connections Māori have with the land, and are significantly enriching the challenges science. The government is committed to promoting meaningful participation of Māori, iwi, hapu and communities in managing their natural resources. Last year, I announced the surge investment of $13.75 million in research to combat the spread of Kauri dieback and myrtle rust. These 2 diseases are endangering some of our most iconic and culturally significant trees, Kauri and Pahutakawa, and it is critical that research gets underway with urgency. The New Zealand's Biological Heritage Challenge is overseeing the research, building on its network of researchers, Māori, government agencies and other stakeholders to ensure that this funding delivers innovative science to combat Kauri dieback and myrtle rust. We can all be part of this solution. This second day of your Challenge Conference will provide you with a further opportunity to expand your knowledge and to contribute your ideas. And I look forward to seeing more of the results that this challenge is producing with the combined knowledge of different science disciplines, industry sectors, cultures and communities. And I encourage you all to take this opportunity to learn more about the science being presented and to engage with each other to help secure a sustainable future for New Zealand's biological heritage, because this is our heritage. All of you here today have so much to contribute. You have the commitment and the drive and the knowledge and the resources to ensure that we and future generations of New Zealanders can all enjoy our biological heritage. Kia ora tātou. The questions, I think, yeah.
Tēnā koe. Kia ora, and thank you, Minister, and I will just speak loudly. Kia ora, Minister, tēnā koe. And thank you very much for making yourself available to answer questions, which are now coming up on the event app. It has just refreshed, so I can see. I know, it's very flash, isn't it? This is research and innovation. And so you can put your questions up there as soon as you are able to load it for you. And see, what happens also is they can vote on how good a question is. Don't you wish that the press journalists that you had that system?
No, I'm just thankful the speaker isn't sitting here moderating it all.
Oh, we're much worse, don't worry about that. First of all, I guess, if I could start, in terms of urgency, where do you think urgency is in terms of our bioheritage, biodiversity? What would you like to see worked on?
Well, I think that we've got a number of pressing problems that the Kauri dieback and the myrtle rust are putting some of our iconic trees, things that help define us as a nation at risk, and that's exactly why that we put surge funding into those areas. So that wasn't just more money that went into biological heritage, that was the government saying this is a priority for us. And when we got together and we talked about how it is that we were going to spend that money, because obviously that goes across DOC and MPI, as well as the science that goes into it, we knew the best way to get that money into doing the things that it needed to do was through this science challenge. So that is one of many pressing priorities for us.
We were talking about funding yesterday, and there were a couple of calls for pools, I guess, because we're talking about philanthropy and how they can contribute to funding, but some more centralised pools of funding so that in their very huge generosity, they don't direct the areas of research. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, we always welcome people that want to fund research in this country. We are also being crazy and ambitious, wanting to lift our level of research in this country up to 2% of GDP. We recognise that government is only part of that equation, that business and other people that want to fund research also have a part to play in that. But if anyone's got their chequebook out and wants to talk about funding this, I can certainly hook you up with the right people. So if you hear of people that do want to put funding in, we're more than happy to make those connections and make sure that the funding goes where it needs to if it's directed in a broad way.
Fantastic. So let's get into some of these questions. What is needed to start the conversation regarding gene editing?
Well, and that's actually something we were talking in on the way, and when I say that you're literally working on the front line, it's many of the questions that are put to us as well. I mean, the 1080 debate, the flip side of that is gene editing in terms of many of the issues that we're looking at. I am adamant that this has to be an evidence-based conversation, and it needs to be an evidence-led conversation. So that's where you all come in, and that's where the science becomes so important, that we have put money into alternatives to 1080. That was one of the things that's been tagged as a priority by the government, but we're wanting to hear from the scientists too about what those real and meaningful alternatives are.
Scientists are very much wanting to know. It's great to see that the government supports science challenges. Any hints for what happens beyond 2024?
Well, when the science challenges were set up, they were originally set up for a 10-year period. We've had the second round of funding. The reviews went through there. It will have to be a case that we look at that when the 10-year period, well, before the 10 years period's up. Don't worry, we're not just going to wait till it expires and then think, oh, we better have a think about what we do about those. But that's certainly something we'll have to have a look at. But what you can see is that the decisions that were made at the midpoint reviews about putting the additional funding in showed that the science was showing to be quality. The other thing that I think people can take comfort of is that those midpoint reviews also happened after a change of government, that the previous government set them up, but we were more than happy to continue with that funding.
So how can the government support a more collaborative rather than a competitive science system in New Zealand? And you can see a lot of people want to ask that question.
Yeah, and look, this is something that is dear to my heart, that we are a country of 4 and a bit million people. I think that Shaun Hendy's talked about us thinking about ourselves as of the city of 4 million when we think about our science system, that if we dice the money up into two smaller pots, we all know what happens. Overheads and business managers, like I was at Plant and Food, soak up a whole lot of it, that we need to make sure that actually we're having scientists work together. And when it comes to these big questions like protecting our biological heritage, I actually think things like the science challenges are the right vehicle. This isn't us deciding, well, that's some funding that some scientists at the University of Auckland have put in a really good bit about, or that's something that Landcare have put in a really good bit about. What the National Science Challenges have done is brought together the national best in terms of the scientists, irrespective of institution, irrespective of where they live, but it puts together the collaborative team of the scientists who have the most to offer. So I actually think when I talked in my speech about the National Science Challenges changing the way we do science and changing behaviours, to be perfectly honest, I was a bit sceptical about National Science Challenges at the beginning, but I'm willing to say I think that in some challenges, and this is one of them, that we really are seeing changed behaviour, and we're seeing the best scientists come together to work on these important issues. So I think this way of doing it, nothing like funding changes behaviour in my experience.
But also, I guess you're asking for the sort of behaviour change that doesn't cost anything.
It does, but if we set up the money and funding pools, that's part of our responsibility too, to set up funding pools and say, well, actually, your best chance of succeeding is by bringing together the nationally best team. That's going to be what's looked at most favourably in terms of putting things together, and that's the role we can play by recognising and rewarding collaborative behaviour.
Kia ora. So Eric has asked, how can we find funding for preparing for pest and disease threats that aren't here yet? Who needs to pick up that tab?
And look, that's a really good question. And I mean, one of the reasons why we put the surge funding into this challenge was that we weren't just going to say, right, we need the National Science Challenge to do a whole lot more on Kauri dieback and myrtle rust, go and use the funding that you've already got. That some of the work that you need to be doing is that more blue skies research that isn't directed operationally, that we understand that we had a particular requirement as a government around Kauri dieback and myrtle rust, but I'd say we have a particular requirement as a country when it comes to those two things. But it's actually making sure that there is the right balance of the immediate, but also that longer term research as well.
So a question that's just got quite a lot of support there. When will you directly fund Māori entities to protect and enhance mātauranga?
Well, we do actually have a science fund that is set up directly to go into Māori communities. But one of the things, and I think this challenge is leading the way, is actually the way in which that bringing together the national best team is very much including Māori entities in there as well. And it's working with that community knowledge, particularly in, if we think about West Auckland, the way in which some of the work around the Kauri dieback, the knowledge, the community knowledge that exists with hapu there about the Kauri and how it's being affected. So I think there are individual funding pots, but we also need to make sure that we're driving national best to make sure we're integrating those teams as well.
So from Professor Bruce Clarkson, the recent IPBES, such a cute little acronym there, report and SOE report suggests a radical shift and upscaling of restoration action is needed. Is the government hoping to directly respond to those reports?
I would imagine so. They're not directly within my portfolio, so I can't give you a definitive answer, but I'm happy to find out and get back to people on that.
Kia ora. Sorry about that banging sound, must be the heartbeat of the nation, perhaps. Do you think we've done a good enough job in explaining to New Zealanders exactly what the challenges are and what's at stake?
Probably not. In my experience, you can always explain a little bit more, no matter what it is. And I think that's everybody in this room's job, to do that. It's about whether it's talking to your neighbours and your family about what you're doing in those individual conversations. We call that door knocking in my trade. But it's about those everyday conversations as well as kind of the national conversations as well. And I think every one of us in this room needs to make sure that we're talking to 5 more people about why this challenge is so important and what is at stake.
I guess this follows from that, and that it's a frustration that was heard, voiced, that scientists gobble up all the funding and not enough funding reaches those that actually take action. So what do you say to this, apart from getting the word out? What sort of action, what's your response to that frustration?
So that scientists gobble up all the...
So they take...
Okay, so this is about the citizen-led science and the community action that can take place in that space. Look, that's something in participatory science is something that I'm really interested in. And I've attended a meeting in this building, actually, of people talking about that. And one of the things that I think, again, where this challenge is showing leadership is it is including that community voice. It is including the citizen voice. It's recognising that as we address a wicked problem like Cody dieback, that we say that there is knowledge that exists outside of the lab, that there's knowledge that exists in the community as well. And I think this challenge can continue to be a role model for the way in which that can be integrated with the more formal science that happens within our country.
That would lead to this question from Maria. The Four Sisters track was closed yesterday after finding P. agathidixia in the soil. Are all rahui, and if I could just pull that one right up, it's bottom left, are all rahui being declared too late?
No, and this is something that the Department of Conservation work with, but that is also where the community come very much into it as well. One of the reasons we did put the surge funding in is so that we could actually be able to identify things earlier. I hope that that's not the case, and it's certainly not just a hope and a prayer, that we've backed that up by putting the additional funding in.
And I guess there is also a time lag sometimes between when iwi declare rahui and when DOC picks it up.
Exactly.
Minister O'Connor acknowledged an inadequate system of funding for CRIs last week at NZPPI conference. What are your thoughts?
Well, I really look forward to Minister O'Connor being the greatest advocate for all my budget bids next year. But no,
next year, not this year?
Oh, but the budget round's already been through this year. We're only a few more sleeps off finding out what that holds. But in terms of, is there enough money in the science system? There never is. There is always more money. There's always more money that you can put into health. There's always more money you can put into education. There's always more money that you can put into everything. What we've made a commitment to as a government is lifting our expenditure as a country to 2% of GDP. We're currently, I think, at 1.38, which is way down the list of the OECD countries. When I talk to my Australian counterpart, they're already at around 2.4 and want to get to 3 and 4. So we need to spend more across the board in New Zealand on science, and that includes the government, but it's not solely the government. We invested $1 billion, the largest investment ever in research, science and innovation vote last year at last year's budget, so that it is a priority for us, and we do need to make sure that we're adequately funding all of our areas.
So you have put a stake in the ground, but in terms of the budget that's about to be released, is there anything you would like us to be mindful of?
I think that one of the things in terms of that lifting, we made a significant investment last year of $1 billion. That you'd have to say it would be a very lucky Minister of Research, Science and Innovation that would come up with $2 billion in 2 years. That one of the things that we have to see is what the impact of those R&D tax credits have across the board. Now, the R&D tax incentive will have an impact for CRIs because people who are investing in research, science and innovation will get a 15% tax rebate. I'd like to think this means 15% more science is done because that money will be reinvested. So we need to look at the impact and what effect that has.
Another top question, should all science challenge research be made available in open access journals?
God, the big philosophical question to end on. Look, I think that there's always a balance that needs to happen. I mean, I imagine that every scientist in this room wants to make sure that they're publishing their work in the most prestigious of journals in their field, that they're peer-reviewed, they're thinking of their careers and their CV, and there is nothing wrong with that. In terms of the access to the information, it is that balance, and it may not be that it's all open access journals, but does the knowledge that you're generating in this challenge need to be available to New Zealanders? The answer is yes. So whether or not it's published in an open access journal, it's making sure that that information is getting through. But it's certainly not the job of the Minister of Research, Science, Innovation to dictate to scientists which journals they publish in. So I wouldn't want to get drawn too far into that debate.
That is a very good diplomatic type answer. You should go into politics. So in terms of the questions that are left, perhaps if your office is interested,
Absolutely.
we can just give you some of those. Engari, tēnei ka mihi kia koe. Thank you so much for sharing with us and also being open to these questions, Minister.
That's wonderful. Thank
and
you.
we have a small koha for you. Lots of time for gardening, I'm sure. Kia ora. Kia ora no tātou. As we move on to our next keynote, I thought I might just check in that our brains are still working from yesterday. Someone said to me when we were talking about some of the terms and some of the traits of our natives, kirituna was their favourite because they think that that is the quality you need most in science at the moment. Kirituna, of course, meaning resilience, being thick-skinned and needing no money, obviously. The tuna. I just wanted to also think about when you are very proud, your chest is out, poho like a what? Kereru. When we have huge stamina and we go all the way till 7:30 at night. We have a manawa like the titi, kapai. So one more for this morning, the pāua. Again, I'm going to go into things that don't get as much press, except for when it's involved in eating. But the pāua, it sticks to a rock like anything. Piri is our word for sticking or binding. So when we say piri pāua, we're talking about a baby that's so attached to its mama, to its papa. And so that's how we refer to our babies. And say, this is your piri pāua, who is latching to you just like a pāua. Kōrero mai piri pāua. And you have to latch onto your research just in the same way, and your determination. Nō reira, kia ora kia koutou. Thank you so much for starting us off in a great way today. And you will have the chance to ask more questions as we move into our theme for today and our challenge, Tiaki. Very soon we'll talk about achieving a predator-free New Zealand. Are we dreaming? Tell them it's dreaming. So first of all, we'd like to have a keynote and welcome back to talk to us about 5 ways to make science more inclusive and diverse, BioHeritage Challenge Director, of course, Dr. Andrea Byron. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa. So we have obviously switched myself and the Minister, so I will keep it short because I know that we are slightly behind time now. But I did want to lead into today's session with a couple of comments, and I haven't learned how to work the thingy. So, what I wasn't going to do at this symposium is stand up here and give a talk. I was going to instead step back and let a lot of other voices take this place. But then something happened in Christchurch on the 15th of March this year that made me change my mind. And like a lot of people in this country, I asked myself the question, why did this happen here? What's gone wrong? And that is actually what I want to talk about today. So unquestionably, New Zealand on the world stage showed a lot of great leadership. But there were a couple of things that our Prime Minister said right on the very first day that this event happened. One thing she said was, this is not who we are. And the other thing she said is that this is New Zealand's darkest day. And those two things didn't sit very comfortably with me. Now, she made a lot of statements that were certainly showed great leadership, so don't get me wrong, I'm not criticising the Prime Minister here, but I am raising a couple of issues because there was this little voice in my head that said to me, this is who we are, and we do need to step up and take ownership about what happened in New Zealand on the 15th of March. And what has that got to do with the crazy ambitious science conference anyway? So one of the things that we did last year is, in this Science Challenge, is that we sat down and worked collaboratively with our kahui Māori, our leadership team, our governance group, and a number of other people to develop up our values. And I'm not a politician, so I can't influence what's going to happen in the political world, but what I can do is take some steps in science and research to make a difference in my backyard, and that's what I'm talking about here. So these values that underpin this Science Challenge are really what we're all about, for a reason, to make this system more diverse and be more inclusive and respectful of other worldviews and knowledge systems. And I hope that you've seen that over the last 24 hours and that you will see that again today. So what are the things that we can do to make science more inclusive and diverse? Well, first of all, take the time to listen to the diversity of voices that are out there. Now, that's really hard. We all know that there's a huge amount of pressure on scientists in the system to get more funding and to work really hard on, usually across a number of projects. There's a lot of pressure and a lot of competition. But I do want to give you an example of a couple of projects that you heard about yesterday in this Science Challenge that have taken the time to listen to, first of all, community voices in the case of the Kauri Rescue Project, and also to our kaumātua and our knowledge holders in the case of Monica Girth's project on Kauri dieback. So take that time to listen to the diverse voices, to go out there and talk to communities, to go out there and talk to knowledge holders, and spend the time to understand how you can integrate that into your research. And more importantly, to acknowledge that those worldviews are equal to ours. Second thing I want to say is that we need to apply a principle of equity more often in our research. So I am going to come in a moment to the issue of power structures and institutional structures in this country, but certainly at a research level, what we can do is to step up and adequately resource and acknowledge that those different knowledge holders and different ways of knowing should be resourced equitably and should be acknowledged, and we should be learning from their leadership and their knowledge rather than the other way around. The third thing I want to say is that it's great to call out racism and sexism when we see it in our society, and we should all do that. But personally, I don't feel comfortable when I see it being called out with further racism, ageism and sexism. And so this was the response of Susie Wiles last year when a new Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor was announced in 2018. And she, acknowledged that we now have a woman, and who wouldn't be pleased at seeing that a bit more diversity in a position so important in New Zealand. However, Susie said this. And whilst I think it's really important to acknowledge that diversity and inclusivity, this, in my opinion, is not the right way to do it. So I know a lot of older white men who have actually helped me a lot in my career. And some of them are sitting in this room, and you know who you are. And so I guess my point here is, don't call out racism and sexism with further racism and sexism. It's not okay to say to people, you're an old, white, particular ethnicity and have a particular look, and therefore you have no place in our science system. That's wrong. My fourth point is that we should get involved in projects that connect people with the environment more. It's so easy to say that, and it's easy to understand intuitively what that means, but it's actually quite hard to do. We have seen some great examples over the last day or so of what that looks like. But certainly the key messages from the IPBES report just a couple of weeks ago, and the point that Aroha made yesterday, was that when we have local communities, and in many cases Indigenous communities, taking control of local environments, that's when we're starting to see the best biodiversity outcomes. Or perhaps I should say the biodiversity declines aren't as severe. So that's telling us something. And we really need to get more involved in projects that do that kind of work. And that also means that we need to do social research and understand how people think and make decisions alongside our biophysical research. And then my final point is that to take the time to investigate our history. We have a fantastic and very interesting history in this country, and we also have a treaty, and that sets us up really well compared to some other countries for including those diverse voices in science, but we have a long way to go. And that's why the comment about this is New Zealand's darkest day didn't sit very well with me, because you don't have to go back very much further than 150 years to know that it wasn't actually our darkest day of terrorism in this country. So I guess my point is that our history actually tells us a lot about how we can move forward, and we need to embrace that and learn a little bit more. Go and do a treaty course. Go and learn te reo. Go and do something that means something to you. So I guess I'll finish just by saying that why would we embrace diversity and inclusivity in science and research? The main reason is that we do get better outcomes and we get greater impact from our work if we do that. And we're starting to see a lot of evidence for that now in this science challenge, but globally, and well, certainly nationally and globally, we also know that's true. And there's plenty of evidence, which I'm happy to talk about later. Kia ora, thank you.
Tēnā koe, Andrea, wena kupu rangatira. Tēnā rawa atu koe, your whakaro. That's what a leader does, and also keeps us to time. Thank you very much. Nō reira, Tiaki. Are achieving a predator-free New Zealand, are we dreaming? Now, this particular panel has been sponsored by Manaaki Whenua, Landcare Research. Tēnā koutou katoa. So we are going to have a rapid fire session now. So we will ask our speakers to come up because this is our focus. BioHeritage research updates, these are, as we saw yesterday, or if you weren't here yesterday, they're amazing. Rapid fire, and we get a little bit of an oversight and update on what they've been doing in the last year, specifically relating to Tiaki. So I'd like to welcome, please, onto the stage at your leisure. Feel free to jump on up. Associate Professor James Russell, University of Auckland, Professor Phil Lester, Victoria University of Wellington, and Dr. Patrick Garvey, Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research. Homai te paki, kia ora koutou katoa. So rapid fire begins, first of all, with Associate Professor James Russell, University of Auckland.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou, everyone. I just want to provide an overview, really, of some of the exciting projects I've been involved with over the past 3 years through the National Science Challenge, through my role as the project leader of Project 2.3 High-Tech Solutions to Invasive Mammal Pest Control. I want to start with some really exciting work that my doctoral student, Zach Carter, is working on through the challenge. And he's looking at fitting a timeline to island eradications through New Zealand over the past 50 years on invasive mammals. And what he has seen by fitting this curve is that island eradications are starting to decrease in the rate at which we're undertaking them, but at the same time they're increasing in the complexity of the types of islands we're undertaking eradications on. And you can see that particularly in the middle of that curve where there's that dip where we're doing those fewer eradications, but they're more complex ones such as Rangitoto, Motutapu, Great Mercury Island. We see that Norway rats and Kiori remain on a few islands, but ship rats and mice remain widespread on a number of islands, so that's where our island eradication efforts will have to focus. And stoats remain problematic, the kind of wandering minstrels of our ecosystems, much more difficult to eradicate from islands. I've been working on pest-free Auckland Island for the past few years. Pigs, cats and mice introduced since the early 19th century. It's the largest multi-species eradication in the world, 46,000 hectares being targeted. Trials were undertaken in the past summer, and we've successfully confirmed that mice would be vulnerable to a very low bait sowing rate deployed over summer. There's a very nice video that's just been released in the last week, narrated by Sutipine O'Regan. I recommend you all follow that and have a look at that nice piece promoting the work. We've also undertaken some work on predator-free rakiura, a proposal there to eradicate cats, possums, rats and hedgehogs from 174,000 hectare Stewart Island. We undertook a social impact assessment in 2017, which found that the community supported the project on biodiversity benefits alone. They didn't require economic benefits to the community, but there were serious concerns around the impacts on deer management and biosecurity for visitors to the island. And interestingly, there's very severe accommodation restrictions on that island, and so enabling conservation on that island requires actually investment in accommodation infrastructure. We've undertaken more work in inhabited landscapes and trying to understand the dynamics of pest mammals in those. In the natural sciences, we've seen a shift from mammalian herbivores to predators being the focus for conservation over the past few decades. In the social sciences, we've seen more surveys and attitudes towards introduced mammalian predators. On the topics of policy and action, we see that there are more non-biodiversity benefits from management of these invasive mammals that we need to embrace, public health benefits and agricultural benefits. But we do need further research on basic biology and long-term studies in inhabited environments. But with that, we've seen the rise of community and large landscape projects aspiring for a predator-free New Zealand. Very excitingly, in the Waitakere Ranges, we're seeing grey-faced petrels are returning in much larger numbers. They have better access to food resources in the Tasman Sea, but there are far fewer predator-free islands because there are just far fewer islands off the west coast of the North Island. So there they see higher colony productivity and fledgling rates, but this relies on community and regional council predator control to really enable those colonies to flourish. So we've assembled a picture now of the kind of social science toolbox that you might want to use in embarking on wildlife management on islands and in mainland areas, things such as community and stakeholder engagement techniques and a number of other ones. So we're in a position now where collaborations of social scientists and natural scientists can choose which might be the most appropriate social science tools to roll out to understand the community's aspirations and needs and how to move forward with bioheritage restoration. We've done some work looking at new tools to market, focusing on delivering new technology on the ground, such as new toxins with higher species specificity, refining existing traps and self-resetting traps, new lures, repellents and barriers, which Patrick's been working on, and looking at regulatory hurdles to overcome and community consultation and support required. We've been working on Māori perspectives in mammal pest control. Tiaki is a place of great cultural, spiritual and natural significance to Northland, unique previously insular biogeographic area of New Zealand. Ngāti Kuri planned to build an 8.5 kilometre coast-to-coast fence there, which will be the first mainland predator-proof fence which encompasses an inhabited area. And we're also undertaking a project surveying iwi environmental managers and contrasting their attitudes to pest management in New Zealand with other Indigenous people in the Pacific and North America. We've done some really exciting work on genetics. We've got a map now of rat phylogeography across New Zealand. On the left there in the purple and yellow, you see Norway rat genetics across New Zealand, and you can see the North Island and the South Island were two separate invasions. If we look at ship rats, the picture's even more diverse. The reds and the oranges are different invasions of ship rats to New Zealand, and then on Great Barrier and Stewart Island, Aotea and Rakiura, we see actually even different independent invasions. So there's been at least 4 invasions of ship rats into New Zealand in the history of the country. We're collaborating with partners at the University of Otago, Landcare Research and Predator Free 2050 Limited to collect the genomes of possums, stoats and ship rats so that we can use those to really future-proof some new genomic technologies for predator control. And I just want to finish off by talking about the ethics around all of this and some of the underlying philosophical questions. So we have a particular challenge with animal ethics, which is reconciling the moral standing of collectives with individuals. How do we focus on saving populations, species, and landscapes when we also have to maintain our duty to individual animals and their welfare? So with Emily Park at the University of Auckland, we surveyed some of the key issues and made recommendations for practical ethics with particular reference to invasive species eradications. One thing we noted is that conservation biologists, which all of us are to some extent, are not always clear about where their ethical commitments stand with regard to the ecological hierarchy of individuals versus species versus whole ecosystems. Quite often we just take for granted that we have duties to all of them at once, and this makes it harder for us to have those complex conversations about, are we focusing more on the welfare of individuals, or do we really just want to save the species as the bottom line, or somewhere in between that? So to that end, after the government announced its support for predator-free New Zealand in 2016, the National Science Challenge project rapidly convened a bioethics panel of 12 expert members, not just academics, but people from all walks of life. And over the past 2 years, we've worked very hard and we've gone through a number of redrafts. So today I'm very pleased to say we've got this Predator-Free New Zealand Social, Cultural and Ethical Challenges report, which is available on the table just outside the door there in the Kai area. And this is a really fantastic report that we're all very proud of. It addresses our responsibilities to biodiversity, kaitiakitanga and conservation philosophy from both Western and Mataranga perspectives, human dimensions, governance and oversight, the role of technology, and the outcomes we're looking for in a predator-free New Zealand. So this is a great report. There's a hard copy available out there for you to browse through and take away with you, but if you have a look through it and are finished with it, it would be great if you could leave it there for others to use. It's also available online through the Crazy and Ambitious website, just crazyandambitious.co.nz, bioethics-report, and it got a lot of good coverage in the press yesterday. So with thanks to all of the groups that have supported this work over the past few years. Thank you.
Kia ora, James, huge range of mahi, so thank you very much for your rapid fire 5 minutes. And now we go to Professor Phil Lester, Victoria University of Wellington. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora. Thanks for having me this morning. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the invertebrate equivalent of what James was talking about today in terms of new pest control methods for wasps for invertebrate populations. The mission statement, to remind anybody that might not be familiar with it, it's been a while now since we've been doing this, is this. We're looking at socially acceptable, cost-effective, targeted next-generation technologies, tools that can be used for large-scale wasp control. In production ecosystems to protect taonga species and minimise cost to agriculture. Now, we're using wasps as a model system here, but we're hoping that any methods that we can develop through this National Science Challenge portfolio can be utilised for a whole range of other species as well. There's been a whole bunch of groups involved in this, so a large number of participants and researchers from throughout New Zealand. There's a bunch of different technologies that we've been looking at. So been looking at behavioural manipulation of wasps using pheromones. That's Max Suckling at Plant and Food Research. We're looking at using Trojan mites, mites that have been recently discovered in wasp nests to deliver pathogens. These mites seem to take on the chemical smell of the wasps to be able to evade them and deliver pathogens within populations. That's Bob Brown's work at Landcare. And Neil Gemmell and Dan Tompkins and people have been looking at Trojan female techniques to regulate wasp populations. Can we manipulate or utilise existing genetic defects in wasp populations, basically, to encourage population regulation in those populations? I'm not going to have time, unfortunately, to talk about all of those different technologies and approaches that we've been looking at today, but what I thought I'd do is give you a little bit of a taste about two different groups that have been working on these systems, and a little bit of Mataranga Maori that we've been doing as well. So this is one of the technologies. So this is gene silencing. Gene silencing has the word gene in it, which is unfortunate in some ways. This is a natural process. It's not a genetic modification whatsoever. And it involves people doing things like delivering double-stranded RNA to wasps somehow. Peter Dearden at Otago University has been working on this. And they've been injecting wasps, they've been feeding wasps, they've been doing a whole bunch of different things in order to down-regulate gene production, an essential gene for wasp lifestyles and behaviour, right? So if you can knock down a gene, then those populations can potentially die. And they've identified some wasp genes that are important in this. We've done some work also in another invasive wasp species, Pallistes dominula, the European paper wasp. that shows that we can actually knock down these genes. We can actually have an influence, hopefully, on wasp population dynamics and lifestyles. So I think that's a really encouraging technology and one that we'll go forward with, hopefully, in future research. I was really pleased this morning to hear the Minister talk about we need evidence portfolio, we need evidence-based decisions, we need information on things like gene drives in wasp populations. We have been, with the challenge, doing some work on genetic modification and gene drives. We have not genetically modified any wasps whatsoever, but what we're really doing here is to try and understand that and try and gain evidence around how a gene drive might be useful, what the pitfalls are, and all those sorts of things. There are people out there at the moment who are saying, on one hand, gene drives would fail due to population resistance, or gene drives might be a silver bullet and wipe out all the invasive species. Clearly, those two different perspectives can't be both right. What is going on? So with wasp populations, what we've been looking at are spermatogenesis genes as a target for a gene drive. We've been able to sequence the genome. We've found spermatogenesis genes. We've been able to show that we can use a CRISPR-Cas9 system to regulate those genes, to cleave them effectively in here. That's an in vitro test, so we haven't modified any wasps. And there we've been doing some population modelling. So John Keane in Ag Research has been doing some population modelling on these. And this is a little taste of the results we have, right? So what we're seeing here is on the x-axis we've got wasp generations or number of years up to 30 years. On the y-axis we've got summer wasp densities and the number of nests that are being observed. What we can see if we introduce a gene that has a role in partial drone sterility, so we're affecting the spermatogenesis genes, then we can see this drive act in a suppression drive sort of fashion, down-regulating wasp populations, lowering their average densities substantially. This, I think, is really interesting. It offers some evidence for the use of gene drives in population regulation of invasive species. There's lots more work around this where we can do things like combine partial drone sterility drive with techniques such as pesticides and potentially drive populations to extinction. The Mātangaro Maori work, I'll briefly touch on that. It's been a real pleasure to work with Ocean Mercer from Victoria University. So she's had a big role in this work. And this is some results from her study. So we're looking at student perspectives at the university, really around the different technologies and approaches that we're looking at within the challenge. And from that abbreviated little table that's going on there, what she's found in this study is doing nothing is really not an option. People want to see something being done about wasp problems in New Zealand, but things like a non-specific species poison is actually rated much worse. So a broadly toxic poison is bad. They don't want to do that. The two technologies that I've talked about, the RNAi, so gene suppression, and gene drives, actually are positively ranked by Maori students in this particular study. So some really interesting results there that Ocean's been finding. I would like to finish. I hope that New Zealand production and conservation sectors and iwis have access to new strategies, new tools that we can move away from the biocontrol, from the use of broad-spectrum pesticides as a result of this. And it is our hope that we will find these socially acceptable control methods. So that's really our objective in the next few years, to hopefully carry on doing a whole bunch of work like that. And a whole bunch of people to thank for this. So that's been a real big collaborative work between Landcare, between Plant and Food, between Otago University, Auckland University, lots of different organisations. Thank you very much. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Phil. So when is a gene not a gene? It's very interesting. So thank you, Phil. And we have one last rapid fire speaker. And could I just ask the panellists for the next panel to go through to the green room, please? Unfortunately, you'll miss out on Dr. Patrick Garvey. Manaaki, no, I've already done that, haven't I? Oh, no? Kei te pai. Patrick Garvey, Manaaki Whenua, Landcare Research. Kia ora.
Good morning. This morning I want to talk to you about some collaborative research that I've done as part of the Science Challenge, and it was only a small part of the overall research of the challenge, but it was very important and very enjoyable. So we're experiencing catastrophic biodiversity loss that we've never seen before, which is threatening human existence. And one of the key drivers of this biodiversity loss is invasive mammalian predators. And they have been directly attributed to 60% of all recent contemporary extinctions of mammals, reptiles and birds. And as we're all aware after reading the report, the recent environmental report highlights just how bad it is in New Zealand. And we're the most invaded country in the world. We've one of the highest, if not the highest, proportions of threatened species in the world, and we've limited management tools to deal with these. But by contrast, we have also opportunities. We have a network of communities and professionals that can help bring out new projects and new ideas. We have funding for innovation, as Pori is demonstrating here with his own design trap. And there's collective aspiration for predator freedom, which is very important because if we aim high and we fall short, we still land among the stars. So what I've done as part of my research is very behaviour-based management focused, trying to understand the invasive predators themselves and using this knowledge to be better able to manage them. And my focus was the stoat and how it interacted with two larger predators, the feral cat and the ferret. And what, unsurprisingly, stoats fear and avoid cats and ferrets. They keep well away from them if they can because both these predators will kill them. But what is rather surprising is that stoats are attracted to the odour of these same predators. And it wasn't what we predicted and it wasn't what the literature predicted, but it was a very clear result. If you put food out there with no scent at all and you put food out there with one of these predator odours, stoats would go to the predator odour every time. So we demonstrated this in pens and we also demonstrated this in trials in Hawke's Bay, that this predator odour can increase detections of stoats. But what we didn't know was, are we able to actually increase capture rates? Will it result in increased capture rates? If we put predator odour into traps, will we catch more animals? And that's what I was doing as part of the Science Challenge in this part of the research. So it was a very organic thing. These are people that got in touch with me, different community groups, a lot through working in Hawke's Bay, but also other people that got in contact in general. And all these different projects were protecting different species, like kokako and kiwi and blue duck, but they all had their own different approaches as well. So some changed lures every couple of weeks, some every week, some every month. They used different lures, some used rabbit meat, some used possum, some used eggs. So what we wanted to do was a very simple study design that would allow everybody to test the lure approach and see if it's working, but not to disrupt their usual trapping protocol in any way. So what we did was just simply every second trap, you put predator odour into it along with your usual approach of trapping, and we wanted to demonstrate whether we could increase capture rates. So we did, and we did very successfully in this. So if these are 4 of the projects that I've highlighted, and we increased capture rates on average by 150% of stoats. So for every 10 we were catching with the normal approach, we were catching 25. And this makes a real difference in when every individual stoat can cause such damage. And it was just talking to somebody yesterday, like this would have cost hundreds of thousands to roll out if I was doing it myself and had to pay field technicians. But just using the community, it was a project that took me a couple of weeks, but had huge coverage across the landscape. And just if we think of it in one particular example there, Ruahine Forest Park, they're trying to protect blue duck. There's 30 breeding pairs within the landscape. And out of that, we removed 17 stoats. And of the 17 stoats, 5 of them were removed with the normal trapping approach, and then there's 12 additional ones that we took out with this approach where we used normal trapping plus predator odour. And if you imagine we would have taken out 5 anyway, this is an extra 7 individual removed from the landscape. And as Jack highlighted yesterday, if you really reduce predator numbers down very low, we can achieve great biodiversity increases without necessarily getting to, or even knowing that we got to 0, even though that is the aim we want to achieve. And we were asked to think about the future and what that is to hold. And immediately, a quote that I'd read many years before it popped into my mind. And this is from an indigenous North American Indian chief. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. We have a responsibility to protect biodiversity in New Zealand, which is important in a global scale, and after all, it's not our biodiversity to lose. Thank you. And thank you.
Kia ora, Patrick, Tēnākoe, thank you so much. I really am always amazed how much you can fit in 5 minutes. It's quite incredible. Now, in terms of our questions, we would like you to go through the app because you've been doing it so well and actually know how to ask questions, not statements. So, we will go through that, but I am mindful that some people aren't so friendly with technology. Therefore, we will have an option of a roving mic. But seeing as it has worked, could we please make the preferred message and offering to go through the app? Nō reira, tuatahi nei, we will direct it to each of our speakers, which helps us as well. First of all, to Phil.
I would love to change the name. Basically, I think the term gene silencing does equate for a lot of people who aren't familiar with the technology with genetic modification, and we're going to be stuck with that. I don't think me deciding on changing the name will unfortunately have any effect, much as I'd like to think I
Why don't we give it a Māori name?
Yeah, well, it's possible too.
Yeah. And it'll be nothing to do with genes. Okay, kia ora, Bill, thank you. James, how will cats be targeted on large islands given the lack of current tools for aerial control that are effective and registered in New Zealand?
That's a good question because the answer is not very well. At the moment, from the Auckland Island project, we realised about a year ago we needed to address that question. How can we target them for eradication, and also do we have an effective detection tool at low density? We've found that baited camera trapping is an excellent low density detection tool that we can rely on for eradication of cats, but we're still left with that open question about how to eradicate them. The ground-based operation on Auckland Island is really financially unfeasible. So in this case, we're leveraging international relationships and seeing the advances the Australians are making on aerial delivery of a cat control tool, a cat eradication tool, and we're working with them to see what of a couple of options will pan out the best, and then focus on getting that registered in New Zealand, probably a 5-year timeline, but in time to roll out for a pest-free Auckland Island in the next decade.
Kia ora. A couple of stinky questions for Patrick. Why do you think stoats are attracted to predator odour? Is that from an evolutionary perspective? And then straight on to, are the predator odours from live or dead animals?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and one I'm still trying to figure out. All I can say for sure is that there's information contained in the scent that's of high, that increases its chance of survival. So scent can convey information such as the identity of the predator, how recently it was at a location, what food it is eating. So this sort of information is available. So although they're extra vigilant when they're going in to smell the actual scent, it's also important and increases their chance of survival. And that's kind of the best way we can figure it so far. But exactly whether there's one particular thing that's resulting in why they are attracted, I'm not quite sure yet.
And did you address the live or dead?
So we used live animals. It was collected from the sebaceous gland of ferrets, so by direct contact with them, we had great fun knocking out ferrets and rubbing towels on them. But that's the way we collected the odour.
I'll just make sure that in terms of there was also a question about ferrets. It's a big issue in Kapiti. Where is that one? Do the lures also attract cats and ferrets? I guess from Ronland that can cover it too.
So with ferrets, it's surprising because ferrets aren't actually that attracted to ferret odour. Well, at least from the odour that we sourced it. They are attracted from odour from different sources such as urine, but that's direct interaction between the species. We have yet to test whether cat odour could be used to attract ferrets in the environment and how that might work, but it's an interesting idea.
Okay, question for Phil now. Do you have any thoughts on the possible introduction of the samurai wasp to control BMSB? Should it get to New Zealand? And that's from Amanda.
So somebody from Landcare might be able to correct me. I think it's already been approved. Is that right, through EPA? It has. So it's been through the regulatory authorities, and people have had opportunity to talk about it and to say what they think. I don't know enough about the wasp itself to be able to say it's not going to have any non-target effects. It's quite possible it will, but it's a good tool in our arsenal against this potentially really dangerous predator or pest.
James, can you elaborate on the community engagement social science toolbox that you mentioned and where to find it?
The examples I gave listed in my presentation were from our paper in the special issue in the Island Invasives 2017 conference proceedings, which has also just been published by the IUCN, and you can find it on the IUCN website or the Invasive Species Specialist Group website. There was also a special issue of the Australasian Journal of Environmental Management at the start of last year, which had some papers from our work on social impact assessment on inhabited islands in New Zealand and from island conservation, looking at that toolbox as well. They're paywalled, but I suspect you'll be able to find them online if you Google them on Google Scholar.
Because we're allowed to Google, except for maybe on our Huawei phones. Patrick, a couple of questions for you. It sounds like you had a great experience working with communities. Any tips on getting people involved, doing mahi on the front line, and also about the challenges you've had amongst that mahi?
Well, it was actually really straightforward from my experience. It was just a situation where people, I spoke and got introduced to people by whatever means, and they just thought it wasn't going to cost anything, it wasn't going to make their trapping any worse, so everybody was very eager to be involved, and really it was quite painless experience. Sometimes it turned up and had a chat with people about what we wanted to do, but sometimes it was just contact by email and sending order over the post and then coming back with all these great results 4 months later, so it was quite a painless experience, really.
Is that because those people are already engaged, or are these new communities that have been created?
These have, all the 5 places we went to had a history of trapping, so they were already involved in going out there. And I think people are very eager to try things that will make what they do better. So it was people that were very eager to get involved, so yeah, it was a great experience.
So this is for both you and James from Kate. Is there any research going into ship rat attractants similar to the stoat example?
Yeah, well, Victoria University are involved with it. Mike Jackson and Wayne Linklater there are doing, and involved with Doc as well, are doing long life lures based on food type lures, and they're working very well. I was talking to Mike recently, and he's getting capture rates over very long periods of time. So yeah, there is some work going into ship rats as well.
That was to you as well, James, and can I just add on a couple of questions for you. First of all, from Jack, people are more likely to support biodiversity programs if they affect them personally. Do you know of any research that links biodiversity loss with extinctional threats to humans?
I think there's a lot of work overseas in environmental psychology looking at how people link biodiversity loss with their own well-being. One of the challenges we have in environmental psychology is whether the best approach is to appeal to people's own values or to actually try and convert them to our values when empowering them in biodiversity programs. I think we do have quite a big gap in New Zealand. A lot of the environmental psychology is still dominated by the North American literature, which is also particularly biased by political associations, which is not something we see so much in New Zealand. So I really want to put a plug in for more social science and environmental psychology in New Zealand, not just around predator-free New Zealand, but around the entire space. But we've got some interesting results coming out. We've done some work on Herald Island and looking at the community's attitudes to what motivated them to be involved in a predator control program, and whether that was more about natural place attachment, so they did it for the sake of nature, or as it turned out, they did it more for civic place attachment. It was more about their duty to the community, which was why they were motivated to do predator control. So it's still a relatively early field in New Zealand, I think, but we really need to invest more in some of the great environmental psychologists we have coming out of New Zealand.
And where exactly is the 8.5 kilometre Ngāti Kuri fence being built?
It's going to be built just up at the tip of the North Island where the Tiaki biogeographic area starts. So it's a very narrow area there, and that's a really unique part of New Zealand with some really, really rare species. So they're trying to move forward and get that fence built up there, which will be really quite breakthrough, because the only other attempts we've had to put up a predator-proof fence around an inhabited area were on Rakiura, and in that case the community there were quite resistant to it. So it kind of shows that when you're working with these community groups, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Just like you wouldn't expect your results in a beach, your biology results in a beach forest system to apply to a northern podocarp forest, you can't just expect that the social science toolbox that works in Northland or the particular method that works in Northland would be the one that works on Rakiura or the one that works on Aotea.
Kia ora. Patrick, can we use scat to repel pest birds?
It's generally thought that birds have a great sense of smell besides seabirds, so it's unlikely that we could use scat, but there is other behaviours that you could use in as Achilles heel. They have very good sight, and maybe if you combine that with a sound to deter them. But although Josie Galbraith in some of her research, she's seemed to identify that some birds can identify predator scent. So it's a possibility, but I think it's unlikely. Maybe other more visual or sound lures or deterrents might be better.
So let's finish with this strong question for Phil. Eugenie Sage has said an emphatic no to your work, basically, gene drives.
Yeah.
Has this affected your research?
No, not really. I don't think the minister will be the minister forever. And there might be people that are more open to different tools and technologies as time progresses and evidence accumulates for or against them. So I think time will tell.
Do you think the name has been part of the issue for the minister as well?
I don't know. I don't know where she's. I think it's a green background. And there has been a strong anti-genetic modification movement in New Zealand. I think we are still in that framework. But as time progresses, I think there's going to be a whole bunch of health benefits for genetic modification. As sickle cell anemia is one that was on 60 Minutes last week or a week ago. And people will become more experienced and more knowledgeable around it and may or may not change their mind.
Ka pai, kia ora koutou katoa. Please give your thanks to our panel. And now we move to a 10-minute video keynote. So you will know Sir Rob Fenwick. He's Director of Predator Free 2050 Limited. He's chaired the Predator Free New Zealand Trust, Sustainable Seas National Science Challenge, and many other things. So achieving big aspirational goals for Aotearoa's environment is what the BioHeritage Challenge is all about after all. So we asked Sir Rob Fenwick to stand in the future and describe what 2050 looks like and what has happened to achieve success in that time.
It's a summer's day in year 2050, and it's really warm. I'm in Auckland's downtown, about to leave by high-speed ferry for Coromandel to visit the world-famous Moehau native bird sanctuary. It's a 1,500 square kilometre area that stretches from Fletcher Bay in the north to 80 kilometres south to its narrowest point between Whangamata and Thames. It's famous because the entire peninsula is a forest and coastline sanctuary where New Zealand's indigenous bird life is flourishing in abundance. And it's been made possible by a program that was launched more than 30 years ago to the amazement of the rest of the world to rid the whole country of introduced mammalian predators. The peninsula is special because by good fortune, much of the original forest was intact when the Predator Free campaign was launched in 2015. Through the foresight of numerous community volunteers, many bird habitats were being protected from invasive predators, particularly here on the Moehau mountain range. As a result of carbon tax of $5,000 a tonne, on top of a tourism entry level of $10,000 per person, long-haul air travel has become really expensive. The New Zealand tourism sector had to reinvent itself. Tourism numbers that were growing steadily at 10% per annum at the beginning of the millennium declined steeply. It saved the natural heritage of the country from being overrun by tourists, and it forced the tourism sector to shift from volume-based to being a value-based model. Now, New Zealand is one of the world's most expensive destinations. I point out Waiheke Island which more than 30 years ago was one of the experimental projects to go predator-free on an island that had a lot of people on it. Back in 2019, the early pioneers of this movement had pretty clumsy tools like basic traps and bait stations. It's amazing that they were as effective as they were when you consider the innovations we've got today. Further along our journey today, we cross the Firth of Thames, where I explain the amazing shift of rural land use. It's shifted away from this intensive dairy farming operation that created nitrate-rich sedimentation that smothered the marine environment of the Firth. Finally, at Coromandel, I stroll ashore to this ringing chorus of birdsong. It's called the Kiwi Cacophony, that trilling chorus of kokako, tui, koroniko, among squads of shrieking kaka. And I'm drawn instantly to the words of Joseph Banks, when in 1769 he came ashore in New Zealand and said, "This melodious wild music is the best of anywhere in the world." So it's interesting to reflect on how this predator-free thing took off in New Zealand. Back at the turn of the century, people talked about this predator-free campaign as New Zealand's moonshot, comparing it to the words and ambitions of US President John F. Kennedy when he said he would put a man on the moon. It wasn't long before New Zealanders realised that the American moonshot cost $21 billion. And if New Zealand wanted to be taken seriously, it would either have to stop this boastful pretense or would have to make a serious financial investment. Because back in 2018, there were literally hundreds of native species on the endangered list. It was shameful. There was a lot of hand-wringing going on, but the decline of our biodiversity was relentless. But one of the problems was the country had no way of measuring the decline of its biodiversity. Despite New Zealand's dependence on natural capital, productive soils, clean fresh water, and abundant marine ecosystems and the like, governments simply hadn't been interested in trying to quantify the value of it. Instead, they used a thing called GDP, or gross domestic product, to measure success. GDP relied on financial growth, but took no account of intergenerational sustainability. Finally, governments realised just how absurd the system was, and they had to balance financial growth with the importance of other pillars of capital, like social capital and human capital, and most important for the New Zealand economy, natural capital. Within a process called the Wellbeing Framework, the importance of preserving biodiversity was finally recognised, and the Departments of Conservation and the Environment were finally on a par with Ministries of Health and Social Welfare. An experimental fund called Predator Free 2050, which was established in 2015, was designed to test the appetite for leveraging third-party funding for conservation. It was a brilliant return for the New Zealand taxpayer. The government's timid $30 million investment became $100 million within a few months, and this was used to pilot a whole range of predator management techniques throughout the country. A national science challenge had been established specifically to protect New Zealand's biological heritage. It was hell-bent on developing new techniques to eliminate invasive predators. There was going to be no silver bullet, so the challenge advanced on several fronts of research. For example, thousands of solar-powered drones operating just above the canopy of the bush that could detect species-specific small mammals and infect them with a laser technology. Massive trap lines linked with sophisticated Wi-Fi technology. State-of-the-art acoustic and infrared beams that could traverse whole landscapes and prevent reinvasion of predators. And New Zealand invented some new gene drive technology that targeted rodents and earned billions of dollars in royalties as countries all around the world tried to reduce their rat populations. While these innovations were made possible by a highly supportive political and economic environment, the real heroes of the battle, then as now, were the army of volunteers all over the country, led by organisations like Forest and Bird. These local groups used to waste a huge amount of time shuffling paper around, filing applications and reports. Now they're linked by a series of regional hubs that's overseen by a charitable trust, the Predator Free New Zealand Trust, and regional councils that do all this paperwork for them. The volunteers are delighted because they're spending more time killing stoats, or these days, of course, planting more trees. This made a huge difference to the morale and social cohesion of community conservation. People wanted to know that they were part of something big and were being maybe watched by the world. And of course they were. To save New Zealand's natural heritage from wide-scale and almost certain extinction is being held up as one of the miracles of the modern world. So it's been a great trip to the Coromandel, and it's reinforced my optimism, despite all the challenges of climate change. And this predator-free New Zealand experiment shows you just how powerful community conservation can be when it clusters around a single cause.
Kia ora, Sir Rob, and I'm reminded that he has a broadcasting background, doesn't he? He's quite good at that. He was actually on the board of a radio station that I worked for, and I must say as well, it looks like everything's going to be fine, and that is the most spectacular sunset I've ever seen reflected on the legs of cows. It's quite memorable. Nō reira, he timatanga pai tēnā. That's a very good start for where we start to look now in our next panel. Predator-free New Zealand, a dream or reality? And to MC this panel, zoologist, wildlife filmmaker, writer and broadcaster Alison Ballance, who will use her environmental expertise to MC this panel. Nau mai, hara mai, kia ora Alison and our panelists.
Māori ora, everybody. Ngā mihi, ko Alison Ballance tēnei. I'm going to start today with two confessions actually. One is that I'm a highly functioning introvert, and at this point, every time I do one of these things, I wonder why I said yes. But luckily, to my left, we have 5 fantastic people on the panel who are going to make sure that this thing goes absolutely swimmingly, and we're going to hear lots of, I hope, challenging and provocative things from them. Between them, they have squoodles of years of experience in the area of biodiversity and pests and predators, and I think the discussion will be robust. My second confession is that I am an avid backyard trapper. It's been a little quiet in my garden recently, but at the end of last week I was very excited to find half a mouse and half a rat. And therein I think lies a problem. Hands up, who else is a backyard trapper? Not everybody, interesting. We heard yesterday from Kelvin Hasty about predator-free Wellington, how every suburb now has a backyard trapping group, and the council has a goal of making Miramar Peninsula rat and stoat free as well as possum free, which it is pretty much already. But that's small fry compared to predator-free 2050. But it's part of it, and we'll come back to that. So a quick introduction to my panellists. I have lots of bits of paper. I'm hoping like hell I don't drop them. In no particular random order, except it's the order in which I've got them written down. Shaun Ogilvie. Shaun's of Te Arawa and Ngāti Awa descent. He's got a PhD in ecology from the University of Canterbury. He's the director of Eco Research Associates Limited. He's also the Māori Business Development Consultant for the Cawthron Institute in Nelson. He's a principal investigator for Ngāpai o Te Maramatanga. He could run the panel on his own. I could go on, but suffice to say he's worked in a lot of places. He has a lot of experience. Nicola Toki is a threatened species ambassador at the Department of Conservation. Her mission is to advocate for threatened native plants and animals. Day to day, she is also on the senior leadership team for the biodiversity group in DOC, and she was on the equivalent panel of this at Crazy and Ambitious 1, and she has some things to say about that. Devon McLean, he's had a 30-year career in forestry, ranging from Carter Holt Harvey. He was on the New Zealand Forest Industries Council. He was director of the National Association of Forest Industries of Australia, director of what's now called SCION, the New Zealand Forest Research Institute. He was involved in setting up Project Crimson. The list goes on. He chairs Predator Free New Zealand. He's on the Biological Heritage National Science Challenge. He's on the Next Foundation. Lots of irons and lots of fires. Bruce Warburton from Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research. He's a vertebrate pest biologist and science team leader at Manaaki Whenua. More than 30 years' experience carrying out research related to the improved management of vertebrate pests. Campbell Leckie, Land Services Manager at Hawke's Bay Regional Council. He's had 30 years operational experience in biosecurity and biodiversity. Predator-free Hawke's Bay is one of the projects that he chairs. He believes that business as usual will not solve the current environmental challenges we face and that people are a critical part of the solution. So that's our wonderful panel. We have been tasked with discussing Predator-Free New Zealand, a dream or a reality. We have just heard a lot from Sir Rob Fenwick about the dream. I'd like to just throw it to the floor. How many of you think it's a dream?
Is a dream a bad thing?
No, a dream is not a bad thing at all. There's a couple of hands. How many think it's a reality? Most of you think it's a reality. Great. So just remember, it sounds like we're dealing with 3 species, but we are actually dealing with 7. So can we do it? So my first question to the panel is whether they think it's a dream or reality. We'll just start to my left and go along.
So without just being socially acceptable for this forum, I definitely think it's a reality. But I do, and partly for me that's around the technology which we are going to need to get there. If you look at the technological changes our society has gone through in the last even 40 years, that the technology curve is massive. And so the ability to have technology to drive the things we're after is, I believe, is absolutely there. I think the comment I'd make, though, is that actually, for me at least, probably only 20% of this is about the technology. 80% of it's about the people. And so for me, it's a reality, but only if we can get the people part of the picture right. And for me, that really comes down a lot to just how much are we investing in the people part of the picture as opposed to the technology and operational delivery part of the picture.
If this panel was Mike King's brain, then I'm the critical side of his brain. I think it is a dream. If we're strictly believe by 2050 we're going to eradicate 7 species, 3 species of rats, 3 species of mustelids and possums from all of New Zealand. I believe that's a dream. But when you have a dream, you wake up and there's 3 possible outcomes. The first is that dream could become a reality, and again, I don't think that is going to be a reality by 2050. I'm not saying further out it may become a reality. You could wake up and it might become a nightmare, and I think there is a small probability of that happening. And the third possibility is you could wake up to a different reality, and I think that's where we need to be, and we need to agree on what that reality might be. And it might be something like we make Otago Peninsula, Banks Peninsula, Mahia Peninsula, Coromandel Peninsula, or even Northland predator-free by 2050. And I think that is ambitious, but it's not crazy. And I think it might be achievable, and there'll be a hell of a lot to learn in that process. But to actually think we can do mainland New Zealand, I think that's a dream.
Well, as a mainlander, and always having the glass half full, I do think it is a dream we can make reality. I do think, though, we need to have a bit of a reality sandwich in how we go about it. And what I mean by that is we will require transformative change. So that means not just a ramped up version of BAU, it means actually rethinking everything that we're doing and how. I agree with Campbell that it is almost entirely about the people, and I suspect part of the issue is we've thought about this and framed it in such a way that is predator-free is the thing we're going to do, the problem we're going to solve is we're going to get rid of the predators. We're not thinking about in terms of our natural, cultural, health, well-being, education package of who we are as New Zealanders. So I think a little bit of reframing in the public.
Oh, kia ora koutou. Yeah, I think for me, I was thinking about this question before the session, and I think if I put my crazy and ambitious mind on, which is really the challenge, I think that it's a reality. We should give it a really good go. I just want to add something to what Campbell said, and I think, well, actually, and what Bruce said as well. Yeah, I think by 2050. Maybe we're going to need a little bit more time than that, but we're probably going to discuss that a bit more. But also, I kind of agree with Campbell about the technology side of it being maybe 20% of the equation, and it's the people side of it's really a key part of it. But I kind of like to think we can link them together, and I want to talk, just mention some work that I've been involved with actually Will Allen, who's down the back there, but that's around co-design of technologies. The technologies are designed with the communities at hand, so just putting that out there is something I think which is a key part of it. So, kia ora.
Thanks for the opportunity. I guess my view is I don't get hung up about this question. It's not a reality today. Not working?
Well, just stop a second there. I don't think your mic's working.
Is that working now?
Yeah, it's going.
Okay, yeah. I guess I don't get hung up about this question. It's not a reality today, but it's a very valuable dream to have out there. I'd like to think it's not going to take that long. It would be nice to shorten it up. I know there's a few others in this audience who would take the same perspective. There's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is we've got enormous changes coming in the form of climate change, and it's going to be very difficult in decades 3 or 4 from here to muster the resources for a lot of this kind of work if governments are distracted trying to shift airports and highways and people and so on. So there's a huge job to be done now. We've got many of the tools in place, the technology is moving quite quickly, and I'm always fascinated and inspired by the way communities react when you actually sit down in their place and talk to them about what the prize is for them and what the tools are that need to be used or what the approaches are that need to be used. And my experience on 4 landscape scale projects now is that when people see what it's valuable, how valuable it is to them for all sorts of reasons, then they buy into it.
On the other side of that, just going back to my backyard trapping group, which is the Mount Vic predator-free group. So if you're at the back there and you look out the window, you can look across to part of our area. And I've leafleted almost all the houses that you can see there. And after dropping thousands of leaflets in people's letterboxes, we've managed to sign up 350 households in the 4 suburbs around the Mount Vic town belt, which sounds fine and it sounds like a good start, but when you go online you realise that most of those people aren't logging anything. So does that mean they're actually even still trapping? Do they get a trap, think it was a great idea, and the first half a rat they caught, they went, nah, this is not for me? Are they not catching anything? Are they catching stuff but just not telling us? And the rest of the people they're just not interested. They have different priorities. A lot of them are renters. They're only there for a short term. They're the big block of people, I think, in New Zealand who you would describe as having apathy. So there's some really committed people, but how do you get to those people who are the ones who go, yeah, whatever, got some other priorities in my life at the moment?
I'll start on that one. You drink lots of cups of tea. If I go back to the example of the Abel Tasman National Park and the opposition against 1080 in the Golden Bay community, which was right alongside that, I spent a year sitting in the coffee, not quite literally the whole year, but over a year in the tea rooms of Golden Bay and in the homes there, talking to people about what the prize would be at the end of the day if they were willing to give us the opportunity to do that. Today we're dropping the third lot of pre-feed, so there have been 2 1080 operations in the National Park, another one going down shortly, and if there's any opposition today, it'll be very slight. So it's about the conversation in the place, it's about what's in it for them as a community, and it's about giving them the assurances they need about the methodology and if necessary, involving them directly in observing the process. And I'm not advocating that 1080 is the solution to all of this either, just to be clear.
I mean, one thing that stands out for me in this whole conversation, there's a very woolliness around people's vocabulary, and predator-free 2050 to me means eradication. That's 100% kill, that's not sustained control. And New Zealand are world leaders in doing sustained control. You look at Osprey and the TB management program, large areas, region-wide sustained control that Campbell's been involved with, Cape to City and elsewhere. They are exemplary pest control management programs, but they're not eradication. And I think there's very few examples of community groups that have actually eradicated. And there's a huge difference between getting a 98% kill and 100% kill. We can get 90, 95, 98% kills with 1080 operations for $30, $40 a hectare. To get a 100% kill, all our eradication attempts on islands and that cost $200,000, $500,000 a hectare. We can't afford to do that over the mainland, even if we had the social licence to do it. Yeah, and the only way to reduce the cost is to find some self-disseminating mechanism. And we don't have that at the moment. And I doubt if we'll get that developed by 2050. We might do it later than that. But that's the challenge. How do we get something that's self-disseminating so the cost per hectare is affordable?
So I think there is something in here to reflect on my experience in this kind of, there's something in here about story. And maybe, perhaps, part of the reason that your wider communities haven't engaged is they don't get what's at stake. We haven't adequately explained what we've lost, what we're losing, what we'll lose tomorrow. And we haven't done it in a way that doesn't entirely bum them out and gives them a sense of hope and action and something to do. And so the other thing I think we need to think about are people's values. So for me, as a fourth generation from Scottish and British immigrants person, my values are around getting rid of the introduced predators because I want to save the native birds. But if I'm a recent immigrant from somewhere in China, I'm perhaps really interested in spiritual places where I can think about and reflect on what's important to me in my inner soul, temples, for example. But there's no reason that we couldn't make a case to the Chinese community, for example, that their local patch of bush might be their temple. And if that's the case, how do you look after it? So I do think there's some ways that we could engage more broadly with the New Zealand community, and when it comes to Māori, whakapapa, obviously. So yes, that's expensive today, but maybe not tomorrow.
I think there are different challenges embedded within predator-free. I think towns and cities are one challenge. Vast rural agricultural landscapes are another. Do you want to talk to that, Campbell? I know you're working in that space in Hawke's Bay.
Yeah, so in terms of the different, I mean, it was really great to see Bruce Clarkson yesterday talking about the urban landscapes, because ultimately the urban landscapes, the rural landscapes, or the deep bush landscapes, we've got to get the solution for all of those. That's obvious. Otherwise, you don't have it across the entire country. The farm landscape definitely brings different challenges, but in some ways, I was saying to the team the other day, actually, I'm really grateful because actually in the farm landscape, it's incredibly rare to have to use tools like 1080. So actually in terms of contentiousness and things like that, it's relatively straightforward. So I think for us, I want to just come back to that point I made. So, and this is something we've learned in the last probably 5 or 6 years about not just the farm landscape, it's across all of those different things. And that is actually, if it's about the people, if 80% of the solution or a large chunk of the solution is about the people, and then if I look at our own project or even my organisation, and I look at the investment we make, now yes, I'm part of an operational delivery team, but even if I look broadly across the organisation, the total investment of the organisation into education and engagement around the environment, if I was generous, is probably 10 to 15%. And that's frankly, if I was generous, it's probably quite a bit less than that. So for me, it's actually about whether you're in the farmland landscape or the deep bush setting or in the urban area, and particularly urban and rural have a higher people component, what's your level of investment in the people part of the picture? Because I would say if it's not at least 25%, we are probably missing the mark. Anyway, that's just a thought on that one.
How much of this really can be bottom-up versus top-down? And I'm thinking predator-free Wellington, even Miramar Peninsula, it's not really a bottom-up thing because the council is running Miramar predator-free at the moment. Do you want to talk to that, Devon?
Well, the council isn't running predator-free Miramar. Predator-free Wellington is running predator-free Miramar, which is a consortium. I think it's absolutely critical that you've got that bottom-up component, but it's really interesting, you hear the stories around Wellington at the moment of community groups who've worked really hard and put this one on. Is that on? Yeah. Yeah, okay, sorry. Community groups that have worked really hard with their trapping programs, and it was all exciting when they could compare notes at the end of the week about how many rats they got, and then they get to the point where nobody's caught one for a month, and you start to go downhill. But at that point, you're nowhere near eradication. And so the challenge for us in these projects is to build on that community support, to take it as far as it can, and at the right time to be able to switch it over to essentially a professionally run operation to demonstrate we can get to the eradication point. And Bruce is quite right, we haven't done it yet anywhere, even in the secured fence sanctuaries where we have probably succeeded, we've had reinvasions, and we know we're always going to have that as a challenge, so our methodology's got to be very smart about dealing with that last 1% or 0.5%. Even if you get rid of them the first time, there's a risk that they're going to come back. It's all got to be part of the package. But I would suggest that if you think it can't be done, you're right.
Has the wider program so far been inclusive of all voices and communities, do we think, and how are we going to change that in the future?
Well, my answer to that is, with no disrespect, team, but take a look at this panel. I'm not sure if we're inclusive of the wider voices of the community, and so I think there's a lot of work to be done, but acknowledging that, so being able to acknowledge and embrace that and think of ways of, who is missing on this panel and how do we get them here 2 years from now, I think sets us on the right track.
Can I throw something into that, Alison? I think the short answer is, for me at least, if I'm talking about our projects in the context I've been involved in for the last decade, the answer is no. But there's actually a bunch of reasons for that. So when you kick off these very large-scale landscape projects, there's all sorts of things going on. And if I think about Whakatupu Mahi at the moment, it's taken, firstly we had Poutere Altane, then we had Cape City, then we had Whakatupu Mahi. It's really only in Whakatupu Mahi where we've actually got the sequencing of things right. And we've got, for example, Rongamai Wahine Iwi right there at the governance and project team and really involved in helping to drive things. And we've actually got the farmers there as well prepared to sign up. So I think for a variety of reasons, we don't always get it right. But actually, but the key for me from the last 10 years is actually probably stop the operational bus a little bit, and just before you can get all that stuff underway, actually try and get the conversation going in the community. Really easy to say though, when you've got a funding bid deadline, and you've got a whole bunch of things going on, it's very easy to say, but actually it's challenging to sometimes integrate them all.
Shaun, there was a couple of lovely examples last night in the final panel of yesterday about people looking for what motivated them as a community, about why they suddenly realised they needed to do something.
Yeah, so I think if I can add a Māori perspective, a Māori layer on the discussion, and it does follow on from the panel last night, and that's that around the motivations. I mentioned the Kiwi Protection Program that I've done some work with in the past with Tūhoi, and the motivations there are individuals are pretty strongly motivated around a sense of protection of whakapapa, because they're looking at the Kiwi, and the Kiwi is seen as a tuakana, so a elder sibling. And so if you were to lose your older sibling, that's a pretty horrible thing for us. So we kind of go to all extents to make sure that that doesn't happen. So there's this kind of, I guess there's this vision of sitting at the hospital bed with your older sibling there, not well, and you're going to go to all extents to make sure that that situation's fixed up. And I think kind of delving into those values, and there's other value sets that are probably equally as strong, or maybe equally as strong, but delving into those value sets to get motivation in behind thinking large, thinking crazy, thinking ambitious is a really important part of the whole picture.
What do you each see as the biggest challenge to this? We'll start at the far end with Devon.
Sorry, say it again.
What's the biggest challenge to making New Zealand predator-free?
Well, I think it's the coalescing of the critical elements in there. So we've got to have the technology in place. We've got to have the community support, the community licence. We've got to have the resourcing in place. And I think pulling those all together is critical. And as I keep saying, I don't see that as a national thing. I see that as quite a local thing, defining it in place and dealing with the folk there who care about that place and who are willing to make the effort to make the contribution in that place.
Shaun, what do you think is the biggest challenge?
Yeah, I think it is about that connection and everyone kind of getting in behind. I think if I zoom in on the technology side of things, I think something that's been kind of a recurring question is that we as, if I can put me into that group, we as technology developers kind of go into a corner somewhere and come up with what we think is an amazing technology, and even if it's absolutely like 99% foolproof, if you take it out there and it's not acceptable, well, you kind of, the technology's failed, really, and it's about how we get around that, and I think that's one of the key things. So it's about somehow, and this is a bit aspirational and I don't really have the answer, but it's about how you get to a position where the communities that are doing the hard yards on the ground actually have a sense of ownership of the technology. I think that's what we kind of need to aim for, and like I say, that's a bit of a dream really, but I think that's a key part of where we need to get to.
So I think what you've heard us all talk about, the complexity, and in particular the complexity of the interactions with people, with groups, with communities, with iwi, with science, and to me that is the greatest challenge. So how do you harness the complexity and drive everybody's individual aspirations for the shared outcome in a way where each person gets that sense of ownership without feeling like it's been foisted upon them by some greater outfit. To me, if you're someone who likes to think a lot about ecosystems, and I suspect there may be a few of you in the room, the ecosystem of the people involved in this and the complex and interconnected web, the nature web, if you like, of ideas and technology, that to me, harnessing that and weaving that together is the greatest challenge.
Bruce?
Yeah, for me, I think it's just clarifying what we actually want and what we want to achieve. And I think several speakers mentioned theory of change and logic models. So in a logic model, your top outcome might be towards or predator-free 2050, and I think we all would aspire to that, we all want that. But we need some intermediate outcomes, and we don't have those. So we need some leadership in this space. We need a national strategy to lead that. And until we have that, we just have this sort of disparate sort of actions going on all over the place and nothing pulling that together. And I think that's what we really need at this time, is some leadership.
Boy, are you in for a surprise in the next couple of weeks.
Can I just say a little something? Like, on that front, I think, from my point of view, I'd like to just pay an acknowledgement to the Biological Heritage National Science Challenge, because one of the things that's really strong in there is an attempt to defragment the whole situation. And I've just from my experiences working with them, I think that there is a serious intention to do that, and I think that's a key part to getting to that solution that Bruce is looking for.
So I'm going to take a slightly different tack on that, and some people might not agree with me, but partly for me the greatest challenge is about how we frame the conversation around PF 2050, and I'll be really blunt from my point of view. It's actually not about predator pests. The predator pest management, and particularly when you go out to our communities, it's not killing predators is just one means of achieving a whole bunch of other things for them. So for me, PF 2050 is about how we're framing a conversation around a different sort of community, a community that's involved collectively a whole lot more, something you mentioned as well, but it's also a community of focusing on killing predators because they want to get all these other things done. And so for me, the challenge is if we focus too much on predators, while that's the mechanism to get to where we want to be around the outcomes, it's not actually the thing which the community are focusing on as what they value per se.
So we've talked a lot about people. Let's talk a little bit about technology. We've got existing tools and techniques. Is it just a matter of scaling those up? Do we need a magic bullet, and what might that look like?
Is there a magic bullet?
I don't know, I'm asking you.
I mean, from my point of view, I'd think the magic bullet idea is something that's not really realistic. I mean, there isn't a magic bullet. And I think the risk of thinking about magic bullets is that you take effort away from other things. So I mean, it's an old adage, but I think we need to be thinking across the whole toolbox of tools that we have, and also be thinking about innovative new ones to add to the toolbox. So just a quick response to the magic bullet concept from my point of view.
Yeah, from an investment point of view, you want to diversify your portfolio, right? You don't want to throw all your cash after one particular thing because the risk is too high. So yes, we should be investing in new technology. Yes, we should be ramping up the technology we already have and looking in corners for other things. But to just follow one idea and hear off down a path and miss the world of opportunities to the side of us, I think would be a really it would create a lot of loss.
So there's a constant process of tech scan going on at the moment between the Science Challenge, Predator-Free 2050, the Department, Osprey and others, and gradually we're starting to link those up so that scanning is being done by folk who've got a perspective over the whole thing. To me, the big gains in the last short while have been using conventional tools that actually turned out to be quite useful when they were combined with smart communications and some refinement on them. And so we've made leaps and bounds, I think, on some of those critical tools. But I don't think that's enough yet. I think we've got to get into the AI space. We need devices out there that can tell us what's going on precisely, and then combine that with an ability to deal with what's out there at the point in time. There's lots of discussion at the moment about thermal technologies for detecting and scanning. We don't need scanning technology when we've got thousands of possums out there. We sure as heck need it when we've got 10 possums out there and we're trying to get the last few. And that applies to other species that we might be interested in, including goats and other things at some stage. We've got to solve those problems. But that work's starting to come together, and the tech itself is the access to technology that's been applied in other fields, often in the military field, for example, for some of those, is now becoming readily available in our hands. We've just got to get smart about how we use it.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that. We are improving our technologies and we are scaling up, but we're not really addressing that hard nut on how to significantly reduce that cost per hectare, and that's what we've got to get to achieve eradication affordably. And the other part to that sort of comment is, I don't know what affordable is. Nobody, I don't think, has worked out how much, what's the expenditure investment we need to actually achieve predator-free 2050. I mean, there's been some attempts. I think there's $9 million is the low end and 30 billion, 9 billion and 30 billions at the top end. What does that equate to a cost per hectare that we'd need to get our tools down to? And it would give us a target to work to. Because some of the new technologies like wireless and thermal, that's actually increasing the cost often in terms of the cost per hectare, not decreasing the cost.
If I could just jump in briefly though, that's a traditional way of accounting that we seem to have done with pest control in New Zealand, where we only account for one side of the ledger. So what is the cost of not doing it? So what is the cost for clean air, fresh water, education, mental health? We haven't really investigated the costs on the other side of the ledger and balanced them up.
That's right. Yeah. And a paper by James and Andrea and Pike Brown, I think they estimated the $9 billion, and they looked at the costs and benefits, and the benefits, I think, outweighed the costs. So if that's the case, why aren't we out there doing it? And I think those models, the costs are up front, and people don't like spending those costs when the benefits are a bit more obscure, the model's a bit uncertain, and the benefits accrue in the future. So you can sort of weigh the costs and benefits up, but maybe humans aren't always rational.
I don't think that the development is constrained by cost at the moment. It may be in the future when we do get to the stage of going to very large scale application, but right now what I see is costs coming down pretty much everywhere we're looking, and a lot of that's to do with the technology taking labour out. If somebody's got to walk a trap line every day on the off chance that they've caught something in a live capture device or to keep it working, that costs you a lot of money. The work that Zero Invasive Predators has done with the operation of leg hold traps, which happen to be a very good way of catching possums, they now operate 1,000 leg hold traps that report in every night onto a cell phone, and it's taken 95% of the labour cost out. That's not always good in terms of some of the other agendas in this space about rural employment and so on, but it's going to be part of the reality if we're going to deliver this outcome.
Let's just go broader again, and because this talk about technology is making me think. A couple of weeks ago, I was down in Chalky and Preservation Inlets with the Department of Conservation, where they have been running a very ambitious program for 20 years to get rid of predators, stoats and rats, off lots of islands down there. That's a pretty good program. They still catch stoats and rats on islands down there. And when you stand on those islands and you've gone around and you've just changed the bait and 30 or 40 traps, and you look out and you can see other islands where people have just done the same thing, there are those beautiful misty fiordland hills receding into the distance, mountain range after mountain range after mountain range, and that's still only the edge of fiordland. We have enormous areas of backcountry with no people, so the smartest trap in the world can tell me that I've just caught a stoat on Coal Island, but the boat doesn't go down for another 2 months. What am I going to do about that?
Well, those devices will be able to respond either by instruction or automatically by the time we get to that point. But wouldn't it be a fantastic outcome to be worried about whether we've just caught a stoat in the middle of 1.5 million hectares of fiordland?
Yeah, I reckon. I was going to say let it sit there for 2 months and go out for boats.
Well, that's what they do at the moment. But it doesn't stop stoats and rats swimming across from the mainland. So if you're going to tackle something like fiordland, that's a completely different ball game again. So how are we going to do that?
I'd just like to respond to Campbell. And he's right, just leave it there for 3 months. And if you're doing that, then there's no point in having wireless technology, really. There's not that much added value. And the reason we're using wireless technology is because we're using leg hold traps, which are sort of designed in the 17th century. And we've got to, so we've got this really modern technology on one hand, putting it with Such old technology, it's embarrassing. We've got to get more innovative in the traps that we're using, so we don't need to rely on wireless technology.
I think that that's a fair enough question, except it shouldn't be one that is a go, no go in terms of making us feel helpless and stopping. Because I remember a time, I've reached that point in my career. I remember a time when we changed our kiwi monitoring to take eggs from the wild, from people walking into the bush for 2 weeks every night to find whether or not it was time to take the egg, to flying over it in half an hour and making 45 ranger days in half an hour. And at the time, I also remember that my colleagues who were Kiwi Rangers being terrified that that was going to be the end of their amazing career. But all it did was allow them to do way more for way less. So yes, we need to get better. The fact we're detecting a stoat and we can't get down to it at 2 months, the fact we're detecting it is the main point. We'll figure out how to attach a laser to it. I don't know.
I'm just going to throw to a couple of the questions that have come from the floor. So to all the panellists, do they consider that the level of scientific literacy among the media, and that includes me, is adequate to competently articulate the issues around predator-free? And if not, what do you suggest as a solution?
Oh, pick me.
That sounds like you. Well, I'll say no, given I'm the critical side of Mike King's brain. As I said before, I think there's some woolliness around sustained control and eradication, and that's not clearly articulated in the media, and it's not clearly understood by communities. You hear people say, I got a 98% eradication. I mean, it's just an absolute nonsense. It's absolute.
It's like 99% germ-free.
Yeah, or virginity or something like that. But, you know, so I think, yes, there needs to be an increase in literacy. Yeah.
This is my favourite question. I consider there to be quite a high standard of scientific literacy amongst the media in New Zealand. Some of them are in this room. That doesn't mean it's across the board. What I would challenge you all to today is, do you consider that your responsibility to competently articulate the issues around predator-free in a way that the media and the public can understand it, that is evidence-based, is your skill set there? Because if you invest the time, I mean, I once made a poor journalist cry because she wanted to do a story about an obese possum in a German zoo, and it was and tie it to 1080, and I just convinced her that if she did, that would be the end of her journalistic career. But it took a lot of time to get there. It takes a lot of time to explain what we're aiming for and why. If you're talking to a journalist and you're thinking, idiot, you've done yourself and the scientific community a disservice. So what do I suggest as a solution? Get to know the Science Media Centre, for example, and make friends with some good scientifically literate journalists, because they're hungry for stories and they will tell them well if you help them.
I think another part of the solution is embedding them in the projects.
Yes.
Get them out there to see what's actually happening, not what they're reading in the newspaper or hearing on the grapevine around the community, but take them out there. It's something that we do a lot of and we should do more of.
I was just going to say, I think so my answer would be no, often, although obviously it varies wildly depending on the journalists or the media you're talking about. But I guess also for me too, the reality is often in the media context, you're looking for both the story, but actually you're looking for the angle on the story and creating media interest around that, because actually that's part of your job. And I think sometimes while they can get the sort of part of the story right, or some of the detail right, they then frame it in a way which provides that other angle, which sometimes can actually be a little inaccurate depending on the context. Yeah.
And I think part of that too is because it's understandable it needs to be an angle, so people that are interested in the articles. But I think maybe a little bit more effort to not have the angle being something that's just so controversial that people just switch off the whole idea. It's about maybe finding more positive angles and kind of having journalism that's kind of living the crazy and ambitious dream, if I can put it that way. So spending more time on bringing us all together as a country around particular ideas. I'm thinking about 1080. I mean, over the years of, some of the journalism around 1080, it's like, oh God, there's an angle there that's obviously been designed to make people read it, but it's actually not particularly constructive.
Speaking of 1080, are toxins like 1080 an important tool in this battle?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I think that, it's just the way it is, the tools that we have in terms of cost-effective knockdown, especially if we're talking about possums, 1080 is pretty much, the best one that we have. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing a whole lot of work on alternatives. I've been involved in a bit of work around alternatives, and one of the realities that came to us working with a Māori community after doing quite a few years around some alternatives to 1080 was that we're going to have to do some pretty amazing research, if we're just talking about toxins, to come up with something that we know more about, that we can actually evidence-based say hand on heart that it's better. So it's a big journey.
Yes, absolutely, and not just in terms of the effectiveness of knockdown of predators, but we are increasingly getting some amazing results in terms of the benefits to our native biodiversity. So if you think about, I think this year in the 21-year Landsborough study, mohua were the most commonly encountered bird. Now, that is a turn-up for the books. Kōkaku and the Whenua ranges, the results speak for themselves. And so telling the stories of not just what we nailed, but also what we made will be important too.
And I agree with that. I mean, 1080 is the main toolbox for controlling possums, rats and stoats over large areas of our rugged terrain. And it will be in the short to medium term. Fortunately, there's some research going on at Manaaki Whenua looking at species selective toxins, gene sort of based. It's not GM, but it's just looking at gene switches. So, if that comes to fruition, there'll be another suite of tools in the toolbox, and hopefully 1080 will disappear eventually. But right now, we really need it.
So I completely agree. I think too, for me though, again, it comes down to thinking about it a little differently. So if you look at some of the work that the ZIP team is doing around using 1080 to eradicate possums, for example, so you're not then going in back every, whatever it is, 5 to 7 years, having to reapply because you've got a suppression environment, you've actually eradicated them, you don't need to go back again necessarily with that tool. I think being able to take that sort of step forward with a tool like 1080 is going to be really valuable when we can do that.
Can we just quickly digress? Nicola, I know that DOC's predator-free strategy is currently being discussed and will be released shortly, won't it, Brent? Can you...
No pressure.
Can you just quickly outline for me what it's looking like?
Sure. So it is a big piece of work, and it will hopefully give us a bit of a platform for where to from here in terms of that moving to eradication, that transformative change, because we seem to be drifting back into suppression conversations. And it is about motivating communities, businesses, iwi, the whole of New Zealand. It's about then innovating, and the bit that I really like is the acceleration impact. So the difference between suppression and eradication is the shift in mindset, the transformative change we're making in our heads, and then once we've kind of gathered the troops and headed down this journey together, accelerating that. Like, it is entirely likely that much of the eradication will happen at the very last minute in a very short space of time. And so I know the team have been working really hard on this, and I think you'll all be quite heartened by where we hope to go with you all.
So under this current government, gene editing, gene drives are off the table. But can we do it without genetic techniques like these?
I don't see gene gene technologies as being critical at this point. It would be a useful tool to have in the toolbox. Many of the species we're talking about, for various reasons, won't be susceptible in a time frame that's appropriate for what we're talking about. I can't imagine that anybody's going to let us have gene-edited possums running around, given that they're an endangered species just across the Tasman. The psychology of that will be too difficult to get to. We should be researching in this space. We should be following the work that's going on internationally, which we are, and at some point we need to be participating. There's a real opportunity for New Zealand because of our unique situation with no native mammals to actually operate some of the early trial work, maybe on offshore islands or something like that, because other people just don't have that situation where there's nothing else potentially at risk in those locations. But it's too early to say how effective it's going to be. Nobody's done it for mammals yet, and the time frame is at least a decade to be really thinking about having something to deploy in a trial, let alone start spreading around the landscape.
Any of these
What he said. No, I guess just to add a little bit. I think that I have a fear that we've maybe been oversold what can be achieved with gene editing for mammals, and so I guess the positive side of that is it gives us more time maybe than we think to have a really good dialogue about it, and I think there's been a lot of questions actually today and yesterday around, well, how do we start that dialogue, and that's a fair question. Well, the dialogue's started in some ways, but I think I'd just like to add that I think we've probably got a bit of time to get our heads around what might be involved, and I think part of that dialogue too is that we do have some clear understanding about the techniques and what they really involve, so there's some work to be done there by those that in the know to kind of clearly communicate what's really being talked about.
Can I just throw a different thought out here? And this is, so from my perspective, I've been in the industry for a few years or a few decades, and I wouldn't consider myself to be well-schooled on gene editing or genetic technologies. But history has got lots of examples of people saying, this stuff will work, it's safe. And then we found out actually it wasn't safe. And so from my starting point for this sort of stuff, and I'm in the industry, I'm passionate about this stuff. That's why I've made it my career. And I'm sitting there thinking, all good stuff, but actually you've got a long way to go to convince me. And if I'm sitting here passionate about it, having been in it as a career, and I'm thinking there's an awful long conversation to go on with a whole lot of people out there about this. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, we'll ask another question from the floor to all of the panellists. Once the 7 predators are gone, do you think biodiversity decline will be halted? And what role does habitat restoration play?
Yes, I think it will, and I think there's a keynote speaker later on that will probably tell us a bit more about that. But that doesn't mean that habitat restoration's not important. It'll be a part of it, particularly for landscapes like Cape to City, where you can restore lots of habitat and bring back the wider sort of ecosystems biodiversity. I think another thing in that space we have to think about is an increasing number of deer, and they're having an impact on particularly the forest understory. So we might be bringing the birds back, but that habitat is being modified by another species that we've sort of lost focus on.
This is like an exercise in peeling the onions, right? Once we deal with the first 7, the problems will start to become obvious. And, that's the time to have a conversation about cats. It's clearly going to be a time to have a conversation about hedgehogs in some environments. There are other species that are major problems, like rats that drive like rabbits that drive populations different places. So there are other targets down the way, but we've got to focus on something to begin with. And even 7 can feel a bit unfocused from time to time, but the interactions there are pretty important. So I say let's get the 7 and then we'll worry.
So I agree with that, but I also want to lift it up a little bit. So habitat restoration plays a really important role, and we're still thinking about this in terms of that narrow focus goal, getting rid of all the predators. If we're also equally thinking about restoring catchments from the mountains to the sea, and all of our streams have habitat alongside of them, and our fresh water is cleaner, there's more habitat for the animals, blah-de-blah, carbon sequestration, ability to adapt and mitigate climate change impacts, they're all really important parts of that will interplay with each other. I also entirely agree, and I see it happening already, that once you take those sort of named predators out, we will start looking around at Mrs. Tiki Winkle and Puss Puss and start kind of scratching our heads and thinking about how we deal with that conversation.
So just from our perspective, just without getting too much into the cats debate, but actually...
Go on.
Yeah, why not? But actually for us, in all the predator trapping we're doing on farmland, for every mustard we're catching 6 to 8 feral cats. And the message simply is this: if we don't take out the cats along with the mustards and the possums, we're not going to get the outcome. It's that simple in our landscape. But to come back to the question around the habitat restoration, they are absolutely 2 key pillars to actually getting the end result. Because we can go and take all the pests we like out of the landscape, and in a farmland landscape where there's 3 to 5% of the habitat left, actually if we don't start putting the habitat back now, then we're going to get the pests gone, but as you said, Nikki, the actual species will struggle to have anywhere to thrive in. So for me it's really simple.
We are rapidly running out of time. We have 2 minutes left. I have one more question for each of you. So what's the best lesson that you've each learned already from working in this area? Who wishes to start?
Can I start? I guess it's a point that I've got to, which is fairly obvious, but I just want to say it, and that's around putting more effort into reconnecting with nature and doing that with your kids. I think that's the thing that's kind of struck me. And I've got a 15-second anecdote. My 9-year-old, just randomly in the car driving along, he'd been reading about climate change, and he just randomly said to me, "Hey Dad, why don't we try and have a car-free month?" And I just came up with why we couldn't do that. But then I was like, hang on. Then I'm like, hang on a minute. There's really good ideas from the next generation, and take them on board. So now I'm going to seriously think about how we might do that. Kia ora.
For me, the answer would be spend time in the planning in the communities, make sure the communities help to co-design the project from the beginning. Any time you spend in those tea shops and in those rooms talking to the communities to get the thing right and people on board at the beginning will pay dividends as the project progresses.
For me, this has been a really fascinating 8-year journey that started with a man coming to talk to me about why he thought we should get rid of predators entirely, and I kind of laughed. And to what the most important thing that I have learned is when you choose a goal, everybody focuses that effort, right? That's why we talk about the moon landing. We wouldn't have had the focus on, for example, the Department of Conservation's work streams on predator control, building in MPIs, building and everybody else is talking to a wider community we probably hadn't engaged with before, had we not all gone for this mad, crazy goal. And focusing our efforts has reduced our costs and increased the opportunity for us to tick this off. So that's been the cool bit for me.
For me, I think it's just becoming to realise that volunteers are a huge part of pest control in New Zealand and the sort of conservation movement. And that just the agencies by themselves won't achieve this, but the communities will. So I think they are really important.
Yeah, so very similar in some ways to Bruce's, but we have an example in one of the projects we're working on at the moment. It's been going for about a decade, Poutere Altane. And for me, probably the biggest lesson of the last 10 years involved in these large-scale projects is we have a massive opportunity to actually create leadership and facilitate leadership and support the leadership of the people in our communities out there. And in Poutere Altane, we had one example where one of the kaumatua basically started to run these hikoi to bring the hapu back to this particular place, mainland island boundary stream, and Poutere Altane as a project. And just watching and seeing our ability to actually, through our funds, to create and to have that leadership be shown by them, and to see how that genuinely made a difference for people. This sort of stuff, you can talk about it sometimes, and it's, it almost sounds sort of really too touchy-feely, but But it's been amazing to see how we can, in these projects, actually create and help empower that.
Great. Well, there's a big red 0 looking at me on the time clock, and I know you all want morning tea. Several of the things that we haven't discussed, and there are lots of things we could keep on discussing, the challenge of killing the last few animals. Bruce made the point before we came out that it's really easy to kill 98% of the animals. It's really hard to kill the last 2%. The great sense of urgency that we should have in terms of how this is going to help us stop our biodiversity declining any further. Is it a dream or reality? It's quite clear that 2015 is a very aspirational date and we're probably not going to hit that, but it's still useful to have it. Several people yesterday spoke of the importance of having dreams, basically. Fabian talked about the aspirational nature of predator-free 2050 is its strongest asset. Aroha Mead said it's important to set bold visions to show future generations that we stood for something. So it is both a dream and, I suspect, a reality. Thank you very much to all these panellists for this really interesting discussion.
Kia ora koutou katoa, and very soon your dream of morning tea will become a reality. Remembering that our coffee cart is sponsored by Ko Tātou, ngā mihi nui ki au koutou. Also, could you give some love to all of our exhibitors, ESR, EcoNode, Middle Rust program. Some of them have snuck into a tiny home kind of sitting inside our kai area, so please do make sure that you give them some love, some kōrero, all of the things that we like. Engari, i nei ka huri ki a koe e te papa, so we will have our kai brought into the most delicious sense by our kaumātua James. Tēnā koe.
Nā mihi kia papa tu anuku, haumi e tike tike, me rongo mātāne. He kai ke aku ringa e, hei hono i te kākano, hei tipu i te kaipai, mo toku hauora. Hei tipu i te kaipai, mo tōku hauora. Nō reira e hine nui te haukai, tēnei mātou tuku ake i ngā mihi whakanui whakamui miti ki mua ki a koutou aroaro. O te rā, mongo koutou ātuatanga, horahia ki runga e te pārei o te ora, hei oranga mo nā ahuatanga katoa, e tauhere nei a mātou ki te ira atua me te ira tangata. Tārehu rehu hia anō ki mātou, ki te oranga mutunga kore, hui e haumi e, tā iki e. Kia ora tātou.
Mauri ora.